The Isle is a small adventure, location-based adventure by Lou Gehring, published by Spearwitch. The description, which is actually not on the back, please put descriptions on the back of your books. Now, I don't know if you can order this anywhere from the website, so I'm not sure if it's even as a concern that you might find this in a store somewhere, but it does have, barcode, ISBN, all that stuff. If you do find this in a shop, it'll let you open it up and take a look at it, but otherwise, I really like the minimalist cover and stuff, but you don't get a whole lot of what's inside. But we can see what's inside, and I went through on a 3-hour stream, practically room by room, reading what's inside, and I'll link to that if you want to check it out in all its immense detail. But the Isle is 40 acres of forbidding rock and low grasses. Seen from the sea, the monastery buildings stand adjacent to the peak of the Isle, lit by a fire atop a tower. The monks never let the fire go out. Cliffs rise above the bitter sea, mauled by waves and weather. Fallen stones, just like Frisian horses big enough to skewer whales. The abbot knows this because he has seen it. And that is the location. But all is not as it seems. So you might think of the first thing I thought of, anyway, when I read that intro and read the first bit of the module, is the movie The Lighthouse. There is a little bit in there of that. You have a very isolated location, just a spit of land. 40 acres, when I first read it, sounded like a reasonable amount, but then when I put it in a calculator, I think it was 0.0625 square miles. So really, it's a really tiny, tiny island. You have monks in a tower, a flame, what did the Bangles call it? An eternal flame, if you will, that they are keeping lit above it. And of course, as one might expect, there is a mystery and more going on beneath the surface. Something I'd heard about. They don't mention it in any of the materials, at least that I could find. Something that I had heard about the Isle before I got into it was that it's written in such a way as to be narratively interesting, if that makes sense, to the dungeon master. So that, of course, if you were to buy this book, who's going to buy it? Most likely a GM who's going to be running it, a GM. And of course, if you're running an adventure, the first thing you do is you usually want to read it. Makes a lot of sense. And that the idea was that this was written in such a way to be interesting to the GM, to kind of keep them turning pages as a narrative piece, as opposed to just merely a reference. And you can kind of see that as you get into it, especially when you get into the areas beneath the surface of the Isle. The way rooms are numbered gives you more of a narrative flow through than necessarily the most obvious flow if you're merely doing it, again, as a reference style. And it's fun to read that way because it does keep you kind of moving forward as you're curious to see what happens. And secrets aren't revealed in the book until you meet them as you're reading it. There is not a list of here's everything that's going on at a glance. You kind of have to read it to get through it. You just get little hints, little teases, and then as you read more and get further in, you'll see where those hints turn out to be either red herrings or the greater truths that are behind those hints. And then eventually, most everything is revealed. There's a lot going on. Somebody mentioned on the stream that they felt that they'd heard that it had a B-movie horror vibe to it. And there definitely is something. There's a lot of different layers in here. Some of them interact, some of them don't. You could feel like if there was some kind of ultimate bottom beginning truth element, that maybe they're playing a little bit with time and how that gets obscured. Because yes, there is something going on that is maybe the ultimate origin, but other things got layered on top and they don't all connect. Some of these things just happen to have been at the same time or some future time and just happen to come to the same place at a later date. So they kind of end up layered on top and then something else later on top of that. And it's not always clear, I think, by design, which, if anything, of the top layers know really what's happening at the bottom layers. Some of those rumors. Why are the monks here? Do they really know what's going on, or do they only know one version of what's going on? Those are things that you get to explore. There is a side effect of that it doesn't always seem to be the most focused on getting to the bottom because you can interact with things. You might stop, start, backtrack, which it's not giving you a narrative flow. It is still very much a sandbox. There are going to be things that are going to maybe grab your attention and maybe send you off on a path that might deter you from finishing the other stuff because you just get wrapped up in those things. And I think that's fine. It also tries to find a balancing point between giving you the kind of loot and things that will to hit that motivation of the party to just, what can we scrape out of here to take out and save, versus dealing with the mystery and with the horror element. It doesn't have a particularly driving force to it, at least not in the reality, though there might, again, be false leads that might give some urgency where maybe the reality is that there's really nothing particularly urgent here. But because some people believe certain things that, again, may or may not be true, that they may believe something urgent's happening, even if the reality says something different. And then you can have a lot of fun running with those different things. But I think if there's a cost to that, that maybe a little bit of a lack of everything cohering into a single whole because you've got these sort of different things sprouting about. The horror elements are interesting, and I think you get lots of flavorful stuff. I think Luke Gearing's his way of writing and his prose fills things with flavor. There's lots of things that's going to get you thinking. Some of it in a disturbing way, I think in a good way, but always interesting. There are not a ton of different elements going on, but there's enough, I don't know if I want to call them subtypes or parts of that, with the different levels, with the different kind of creature types that you find that give you a lot of bang from your buck. And I think give you enough variety to make things feel interesting. And they're definitely evocative, and it's super flavorful. The design, it's very, very neat, very tidy. They're not trying to squeeze too much on a page, generous with the text size and the white space. So it's not trying to squeeze everything in. It's very, very nice, 75 pages. I'm sure there's going to be someone out there, you could argue, you could probably cut it in half by squeezing in more columns, reducing the print, or using thinner margins on the edges, but I really like the way it reads. It's a very nice, comfortable book. Everything is clearly laid out. If I had to say there's one thing that I think is maybe a bit of a double-edged sword, when you look at the initial map of floor 1, you can see here, it's a very abstract style of mapping. There are small dots within the rooms, a dot grid that you can eyeball and count to get the overall dimensions, but actually eyeballing is a little bit tough because they've made all the backgrounds this kind of smeary gray texture, and then you have the dark dots against that smeary gray texture. Doesn't make it easy to actually see without kind of zooming in if you're using a digital PDF, which I used on stream, or if you're trying to look at the physical book. You also don't get the benefits of being able to see features within the room represented at all, so you have to make sure you're getting that from the text. And then the corridor connections, they don't tell you how long those corridors are. They just merely say they're there. So you have to figure that out. It would have been nice for them just to say or tell us to use dice. Of course, you can do all this yourself. But there's no, I guess just say in general, this is sort of indicative that there's no hand-holding here. You're not given, hey, here are why the player should end up at the aisle. Here are some plot hooks for the players of the aisle. No, that's all going to be left to you. It is very much, here is a location. They've made it very easy to drop in your campaign, but making those connections to your campaign and making it a place that the party may want or need to visit is really going to be entirely up to you. And if there's anything I might say, man, might make it a little bit tough, it is that. I think once the party gets to the aisle and then down into the mysteries of the aisle, I think there's a lot of compelling reasons to keep going. But I could also maybe see that there might be some trouble getting them to invest in there, getting that initial step. But I'm only reading it. I haven't played it. And I'm sure folks have done some really creative things. And of course, look, players are players. You throw a carrot in front of them, they're probably going to go for it. So I imagine that you probably don't need too much pushing to get your party there, but you might need to think a bit about, okay, how am I going to get these steps? One, getting them to the aisle, because there's nothing there but that monastery. There's not really any other reason to go there. And the monastery itself, other than the fact there's that mystery, which might not even be apparent until you get there, it's not really much reason to visit the monastery. And then that next step of, okay, you've done that part, now get into the mysteries. Might be a struggle. Just keep in mind, you might need to work on that. I'm definitely going to go and read and look for some folks who have played it in their session reports and see kind of what folks did. And I encourage you, if you're going to run the aisle, maybe take a peek at what other folks have done just to get some ideas if you don't have any ideas of your own. But it really seems like a fun little micro setting. Everything is contained. It is written for something called the Vanilla Game, which is just Spear Witch's, I guess, home system. Pretty generic OSR. I think it's meant to just be a generic OSR system that they can use without having to worry about any licensing or anything like that. Things will translate pretty easily. You might need to check some things in here. For example, they're using an armor class. Low numbers are the low numbers are the least amount of armor. High numbers are the highest number of armor, but it's not in the ascending AC system that some folks might be familiar with. So an AC of 6 or 7 is pretty well armored. It's not 16 or 17. So there's going to be a little bit of conversion you might need to do. But I think once you figure out that that factor. Everything else will pretty much slot in. They're using hit dice, so it's pretty easy to figure out what monsters should be doing, and then you can figure out your armor classes, and you'll be good to go on that side. But just in case you're wondering if this is written for a particular OSR system, it's not. It's for this vanilla system, which I want to say there's a free version online, but I might be wrong. I will put a link to it in the description just in case. I definitely would recommend it. Really fascinating to read. It seems like it'll be fun to run. It's always evocative and full of stuff that gets my mind going, which I always love. And it's written in a way to engage with your brain as a GM. So if you're tired and you're looking for some dungeons and some modules just to take on an approach that really looks to engage with you as a reader and not just as a game master, but both, the Isle definitely does that. Really interesting, really intriguing. I'm curious if there's going to be more written in this style. A lot of fun to read. Think you'll enjoy it. That's all I got. Game on. Talk to you later.